this is Steve Bishop from ProgrammingMadeEasy.com, and today I've got another In My Opinion video for you guys, where you guys get to ask me any kind of questions that you'd like. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the comment section below this video, and as long as it's a good one and I've got time to talk about it, I will certainly do so. So today's question is not from any particular individual. It's really kind of a question that I get asked both in my personal life, my professional life at WazU, and also you guys online, you do ask me all the time too. And that is, what is the language I should be interested in learning right now? Like, what is the thing that I should be doing, both in terms of to further my career, or I'm just getting started, so what language would be best for me, that sort of thing. So today, I thought, aside from just presenting to you my opinion about that, I would also show you some hard and fast statistics about this. Because in 2018, Stack Overflow did a survey, and they do this every year. They survey their users to find out what are the languages that they know, what are the technologies that are being used, what are the platforms people prefer, that sort of thing. So I thought I would show you guys the statistics along with my opinion. And this is gonna be kind of a long video. I'm gonna go through the languages, I'm gonna go through some platforms and frameworks and databases and that sort of thing. So just kind of scope it out, keep with me. If somebody wants to mark I'll probably go through in the description and mark like where I'm, some timelines of where I start talking about specific topics. So this could get a little lengthy, but just look in the description for those links to those specific sections, okay? So, first and foremost, let me go ahead and switch over to my screen here, where you can see this is the survey from Stack Overflow. If you want to look at it yourself, you can go to insights.stackoverflow.com/survey/2018. And there's a lot more information in here besides just the technologies section. There's things like demographics, so, male, female, race, so are you Caucasian, African American, Indian, Asian, Hispanic, whatever. There's demographics for that. There's all sorts of other good information in here too, like how far do people commute, do people work from home, how many people are self-employed. So there's a lot of great statistics in here I'm not going to cover in this video. I'm just going to focus mostly on the technology section. So first and foremost, probably to no surprise to anybody, the top language that developers on Stack Overflow know is JavaScript. Okay, so JavaScript is the main language that you have to know if you're going to be doing anything programming for the web, right? Doing any sort of website development, you really pretty much need to know JavaScript. Now, along with that, obviously, you also need to know HTML and CSS. And so I typically kind of group these three together. You need to know JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But that's not entirely true. You could theoretically do some website development without doing any JavaScript. So like C# developers, we can use ASP.NET Core MVC with Razor. And because we have Razor that we can embed in our CS/HTML files, we don't really have to have JavaScript in a lot of situations. So you could theoretically not do JavaScript, but pretty much if you're going to do any sort of web development, you really have to know JavaScript. Okay, so moving on to SQL, or SQL as some people really insist it be pronounced. SQL or SQL is number 4 on this list for a pretty good reason. And you may be wondering, why is SQL that far up on the list? Well, that's because every developer that's a back-end developer, a full-stack developer, has to know SQL because we're talking to a database, right? We're communicating with some sort of persisted data. And that persisted data is typically stored in some sort of relational database management system that relies upon the SQL language. So you got your full stack developers, you've got your back-end developers, but then you also have people like data scientists that need to work with SQL databases. They're not building websites, but they are doing data analysis. You've got developers as far as like DBAs, like you have legitimate, their whole job is just to manage the database. So they have to know SQL, and a lot of those people are on Stack Overflow as well. And then you've got other people like management who sometimes need to do SQL queries because they want to check out the data, they want to run reports and stuff. So SQL is a really big and important language to know for a lot of different disciplines in this industry. So moving on, Java. Java is really kind of the first language outside of JavaScript, like the first programming language outside of JavaScript. And you may be wondering why Java is ranked higher than C# or like PHP or something like that. Well, Java is the main language that's used for Android. So if you're going to be doing any sort of Android mobile phone development, you pretty much have to know how to do Java. So that's a big reason why Java is so prevalent. It's been around for forever. It predates a lot of these other languages. And the other thing about Java is, even though they've lost kind of a market in that you can't run a applet in the web browser anymore, they still have a very robust back-end following. So there's companies like Amazon, for example, uses Java. I believe also Netflix uses Java. So you still have a lot of companies that are using Java as the back-end platform to support their business. So you've got Android and businesses all using Java, which means it's not really going to go anywhere. Even though they lost being able to run applets in the browser, it's still just going to remain a very top-notch language. Okay, so Bash. Bash and Shell. For those of you guys who don't know what Bash is, it's essentially the command line utility or the command line language for working inside of Linux and Apple. You can also get a Bash command line for Windows if you really want to. So for those of you who are doing development, and I think most of you guys who do if you're doing Bash, you probably already know there's a Bash tool for Windows. But Bash is essentially the command line language that we talk to our operating system to do things like deployments, so copying files, doing deployments, running some sort of application, or telling an application to run. So we do all of our scripting and like our CI/CD, so our continuous integration and continuous deployment. A lot of that stuff revolves around having Bash scripting. Okay. Now I'm not sure if PowerShell is included in this. I would assume that it is, because it's kind of on the same. It's the same thing, but for Windows. So that's a good language. That's something you really have to know. It's not a language that you're going to go learn Bash and then go program, right? You're not programming in Bash so that you can do web development. You do web development, therefore you have to know Bash. Because how else are you going to deploy your application or do your Git commits and pushes and pulls and stuff? How are you going to do those things if you don't know how to use Bash? Okay, you can get away with some stuff. There's a lot of great tools and utilities, but really if you just know the commands themselves, it makes things a lot easier. Okay, so Python. Now Python is the fastest growing programming language in the industry today. Bar none. It is definitely growing. Now Python is really big in things like data sciences, artificial intelligence, machine learning. So really kind of tip of the spear stuff. If you are looking for the language that is like really making inroads, really growing, really establishing its roots, and has some great new technology, and it really has a huge community. Python has a huge community around it. Then Python might be a good choice for you. Now, my personal opinion about Python is I personally don't like it. I don't like to write in Python at all. It reminds me way too much of Visual Basic and BASIC. The verbosity of the syntax and the whole indentation of things makes things feel a little weird. And maybe that's just because I'm such an advocate for the C-based languages, which Python, I guess, technically is a C-based language, but like the C-based syntax of things. I just love it so much, especially with C# with curly braces, semicolons, that sort of thing. It just feels weird to be programming in Python, okay? So that doesn't mean it's a terrible language. I think that there's plenty there, and I kind of envy people who do Python and like Python, because I think that you guys are definitely on your way up, and I don't see that there's any stopping of that particular train. And also, you guys get all the cool gadgets, right? You guys get all the cool technology now. Everybody in the industry is trying to gear themselves towards you guys. So Python is a good language if you really want to learn a language that's going to keep you employed and give you like a wide array of opportunities for your future. Like you just kind of pick which direction you want to go. Python is a great language to do that in. Okay, so we're going to move on to my beloved C#. I am just such a huge fan of C#, as most of you guys know. It's my absolute most favorite language. Now, one of the reasons why I like C#, and I would say of all of these languages that we've talked about, they're all good to know for a variety of good reasons. But I'm going to tell you why I think the language you absolutely must learn is C#. And again, this is totally a biased opinion, totally understand. But I just want to I want to put something out there on the table that I think a lot of people would probably agree with me on. And that is C# is a very simple language that you can base all of the other languages and relate those other languages back to. Okay, so I would equate that to something like this. If you're going to learn a foreign language, so I speak English. If I'm going to go learn another language like Spanish or French or German or whatever, I'm going to relate those other phrases from those other languages back to the English that I know, right? So I'm going to think in terms of what the English version of that phrase is until I become really, really comfortable and fluent in that language. And that to me is what C# is. C# is the base language that like all these other languages are easily relatable back to. Because there's a lot of different stuff that you get in C#. We have functional style programming, we have object-oriented programming, we can do procedural programming. There's a lot of different ways that you can do C#. We've got unit testing and just the list goes on and on and on. That whatever it is that you want to learn in some other language, you can revert back to your C# roots and understand it, okay? And don't get me wrong, C# was not my first language. Like, C# was not the first language I learned. In fact, it was probably the fourth language I learned. I think the first language I learned was either, I'm not sure if it was JavaScript or IRC for MIRC, like MIRC's scripting language. But right around the same time, I learned both of those. And then I learned VBA, right? And then I learned it, actually, so then I learned VB.NET, and then I learned C#. So it's actually even more than that. It's like my fifth language. But still, everything that I do, everything that I have learned, like after C#, I relate back to C#. And even the stuff that I know in JavaScript and VB, I still relate back to the concepts that I know in C#. It's just such a great fundamental language to learn that if you learn it, it makes everything else much easier to comprehend and understand. So that's why my personal pick is if you don't already know the C# language, you really should learn it because it's going to make like everything else so much simpler to understand. Okay? So my beginner language, definitely for beginners, C# is the language. Okay, moving on. PHP. I think PHP is it's still relevant, but I wouldn't say that you should be basing a career on it. I think the main reason why PHP is still a thing is twofold. Okay, I think there's two reasons why PHP is still at the level that it is. Number one, content management systems are almost exclusively PHP. So you've got like WordPress and Joomla, and those two specifically are PHP based. So if you're doing content management systems because you want easy, quickly deployed websites, or if you're like doing web hosting services, then PHP is like a pretty big thing with content management systems. You can also do things like extensions for WordPress and Joomla and that sort of thing. But I think that's only one part of it. The other part of the reason why PHP is still so high on this list is because the number one language on here is JavaScript. And if you just go back a few years, really the only language you could really work with for free as a back-end language was PHP. So if you're writing JavaScript on the front end and you wanted to communicate to a server on the back end, that server was likely written in PHP. So you have all of these JavaScript developers who've been in the industry for, 15, 20 years, they had to know PHP because that was really kind of the only language that was out there that you could build a web application with for free and didn't really, you could just tinker with, and there was a lot of good support for. So that's kind of the reason why I think PHP is still relevant as far as this survey goes. But as far as the relevancy in the workplace or trying to find a job, unless you really, really want to stick with content management systems, I wouldn't say that PHP is really the area I would suggest that you go. That doesn't mean there isn't work for it. I know there is. There's some businesses that still hire for it, but the market, I think, is oversaturated with people who know how to do PHP versus the number of jobs that are available in PHP. Okay? By the way, if you have evidence to the contrary, please let me know. I am all about being told that I am wrong, as long as you can back it up with some good solid evidence that can change my mind, okay? And that goes true for all of these, not just PHP. Like if you have an opinion about something that's well established and you have good evidence to support it, I'd love to learn more about it because I want to be better myself in this industry. I want to know more about the industry, and if you've got some good solid evidence to make me change my mind, I'm all about doing that. Okay, so C++ and C. I'm going to group these two together. They're typically grouped together pretty well. C++ and C are really, it's kind of funny to think about this, but all of the other technologies and languages we've talked about up to this point are all based upon, or all rely upon C++ or C at some point. Okay, like the C#, .NET, you know, the .NET runtime is C++ and C based. You can't run C# code if you don't have C++ and C actually, you know, doing the communication to the operating system for you. So C++ and C are really that low-level language that are managing the resources on the computer directly. And that's really, really not going anywhere, right? C++ and C are not going anywhere because all of these other technologies that we've been talking about that are the high-level languages are based upon C++ and C. And maybe assembly too, but I don't think that assembly is nearly as popular. So if you know C++, if you do go learn C++ or C, and you decide to start using those skills, you're going to find that there's actually quite a bit of work out there for it, and everybody really relies upon you. Like the world of software development wouldn't be where it is if it weren't for C++ and C developers. Okay, it's the language for both Linux, Apple, and Windows. Everything uses it. It's totally it's as cross-platform a language as you can get. Okay, moving on. TypeScript. For those of you who don't know, TypeScript is a subset of JavaScript. TypeScript is basically, it's like it's C# for JavaScript developers. Well, not really. It essentially, for those of us that come from an object-oriented programming background with things like Java or C#, we like our classes, we like our interfaces, we like our strict typing, and we got that with TypeScript. And TypeScript, being a subset of JavaScript, essentially compiles, or they call it transpiling. So if you write TypeScript in your language that has type safety and interfaces and classes, it actually gets transpiled into JavaScript. So it gets converted, right? It gets converted from this TypeScript language over to JavaScript, which means that the C# developers and Java developers, etc., can feel really comfortable doing TypeScript. It feels right. All the constructs that we learn about doing development work inside of TypeScript. So that's great. That's why a lot of us developers in object-oriented programming circles really like TypeScript so much. Not only that, but TypeScript is really the language of Angular, which Angular we're going to get into a little bit later, but TypeScript is so tightly linked now with Angular that you really can't do Angular without knowing TypeScript. I mean, you can, but you really don't want to. It's kind of hard to get around. So, but TypeScript is just a really beautiful version of JavaScript that I love, makes things a lot easier. So definitely something worth checking out, especially if you already know JavaScript. Like if you already know JavaScript, I highly encourage you to learn TypeScript. And if you are interested, if you're a C# developer or a JavaScript developer and you're interested in learning a version of JavaScript that feels more comfortable, TypeScript is perfect for you, okay? Moving on to Ruby. So here's the thing I like to say about Ruby. Ruby is not really going anywhere, either up or down. And it's a well-established enough language that there's still some work out there for you, and there's not enough people really to fill those jobs. Like, there's not a lot of people. You can see on the survey, only 10% of the people who responded even know Ruby. So the pool of applicants who can write in Ruby is very, very small, but there's also not that many jobs for it, okay? But if you do find a job that is Ruby-centric, where you have to know Ruby in order to go do it, the chances of you getting that job are a little bit better because the number of people that you're competing against to get that job are a lot smaller. So there's some benefits there. There's some trade-off. You know, the job market for Ruby is not as high, but if you can find one of those jobs, it's going to pay really well, and you don't really have to worry about too much competition for it. Okay, so it might be worth looking at Ruby for that. And I don't personally use Ruby. I don't know it personally. I do plan on learning Ruby because I think that it's out there enough that I should know it. But from what I am told, it is a very easy language to learn and understand and work with. So it might be a very good starter language for you to get embarked upon. I can't really say specifically, though. I don't really know. It's just what I hear from the community. Okay, Swift and Objective-C, these are really basically Apple languages for building Apple apps. I can't really say much about those because I don't do either one of them. I'm not an Apple guy, honestly. I'm going to move on to Go, or also called Golang. If you're wanting to do some research on what Go is, you probably need to do Golang. But really, Go is not, unless you're planning on working for Google, I just don't really see much purpose in learning Go other than just, hey, this is interesting. It's kind of a hobby to do. So Go is the language that Google came up with, and therefore it's really not a language that's really going to be, it's not going to supplant anything, I think. I think it's just kind of an internal thing that Google likes to use. Okay, moving on to Assembly. Assembly is kind of in the same ilk as C++ and C. It's a low-level language that talks to the system more directly, so you're managing the resources more directly on the box. Assembly is way harder to learn, though. Like, assembly is ridiculously difficult to learn, honestly. I am amazed at the people that can understand assembly. It is such a tough language. So I'm going to move on here. VB.NET is obviously Microsoft's other, like, redheaded stepchild, which I am a redheaded stepchild, so I can say that. But VB.NET is just kind of like, I don't really see much purpose in learning VB.NET if you're planning on learning C#. Like, I would say the only reason you really need to know VB.NET is not to be a stepping stone into any other languages, but rather you have to learn it because that's what a previous developer wrote it in, right? Legacy applications is really the only reason to do VB.NET nowadays, as far as I'm concerned. Again, if you've got proof evidence to the contrary, I'd love to hear it, but I mean, only 6.9% of people that responded to this even use it or know it. R is another language very similar as far as the spheres that it revolves around, the platforms and stuff that it or the purposes for R are similar to Python. It's kind of a language for dealing with a lot of mathematics and stuff. And I'm just going to skip down here to VBA. I think VBA, us poor lowly Access and Office and Excel developers who do VBA, we're kind of, I think the software development community hardly considers us developers. It's kind of funny, but there's some really cool stuff we can do with VBA, right? We've learned that. But really the market for VBA is just not there, right? You're not going to find a bunch of jobs doing it. You're not really going to even get paid very well doing it because you're working with Microsoft Office products. And typically businesses are not revolving their enterprise stuff around VBA or Office. So that doesn't mean you can't fall into one of those jobs. It's rare, but they do exist. But okay, moving on. There's a little blurb down here that Stack Overflow put about the languages. For the 6th year in a row, JavaScript is the most commonly used programming language. Duh. Python has risen in the ranks, surpassing C# this year, much like it surpassed PHP. So clearly Python is the up-and-comer. It's the fastest growing computer language. Okay, major programming language. Okay, so I'm going to move on now. So that's all the languages, right? It's a pretty good, I think I've gone over pretty much all the big ones in there. Moving on to frameworks, libraries, and tools. And I'm not going to hit on a whole bunch of these. I'm just going to touch on a few of them. The number one framework, as far as what developers know or use on Stack Overflow, is Node.js. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what Node.js is, it is a back-end service. It's a back-end platform for doing software development that you can write JavaScript in. So you can write JavaScript. You can use JavaScript, and it shouldn't surprise you then that if we go up the list here, the number one language that professional developers use is JavaScript. Therefore, a platform that you can write JavaScript for to do your back-end development would be the number one platform as far as rankings on Stack Overflow. So Node.js is this, again, a platform you can write JavaScript for, and the JavaScript will run on Node.js. Now, Node.js is actually a C++ based platform. So the innards of it is built on C++ and C. So it runs cross-platform. It will run on Linux, Apple, or Windows, which is why Node is so ubiquitous. Like you only need to know JavaScript in order to do a website, in order to do the back-end development, and we'll also see that there's a way to use JavaScript or JavaScript object notation in a way for your database management. So a lot of developers just learn JavaScript essentially, and they can build a full application with just their JavaScript knowledge. They don't need any other languages really. So that's one of the reasons why Node is so popular, is because you can write that, you can tell it what to do in JavaScript. Now, Angular and React are both front-end frameworks. Node.js was a back-end platform. I consider it more of a platform than a framework, but okay. Node.js is back-end. Angular and React are front-end. And Angular, it's kind of surprising to me that Angular is still higher than React. And it may just simply be because Angular's popularity was pretty big and React is kind of the up-and-comer. But definitely in the job market arena, there's more work to be found in React. Like there's more, if you just go on any of those job searching websites and look for jobs hiring Angular developers versus hiring React developers, I'd say 9 out of 10 times you'll find that React developers there's more React jobs than Angular jobs, okay? That may not be the case in all circumstances. You might be in that 1 out of 10, but by far and away, I think React is the language, the front-end framework, I should say, that people are looking for in the business. Also on this particular topic, I'd like to point out that I think React, so there's kind of a learning curve between both of these frameworks. I think Angular is a little easier to learn, especially if you're stepping off of some other language, like, Java, PHP, C#, Ruby, or something like that. I think Angular is it's not an easy language, but it's easier than React to get into. So React has a pretty sharp, steep learning curve, but I think once you get React, I think React is a better language than Angular, personally. And then again, that is personal bias. I totally understand, and I totally admit to it and cop to it. But I like React better than I like Angular. Even with Angular 4, I still think React is a better framework to work within. Now, that being said, Angular is really good. And Angular is not going to go anywhere right now, for the foreseeable future anyway, because it's backed by both Google and Microsoft, right? They're both working together on Angular, which means I don't see any reason why you would suspect that Angular is going anywhere in particular. React, though, is definitely the up-and-comer. There's a lot more work out there for React, but it is a steeper learning curve to get started with. But if you can learn it, you're definitely going to be having a leg up in the industry. Now, I love to see this. .NET Core is basically the second biggest back-end platform. That is awesome. I am so thrilled to see this. .NET Core is so high on this list. And I think there's a big reason for that. Number one, .NET Core is now cross-platform, right? Is the cross-platform that we have. We can build a C# .NET application and do the deployment across all the different platforms now, Linux, Apple, or Windows, which is not something that we really had with C# and Microsoft before, right? And up until a few years ago when they decided to do .NET Core. So, yeah, I mean, .NET Core being number 4 here, it warms my heart. I think it's awesome. I don't think it's going to quite catch up to Node, at least anytime soon, but the great thing is that .NET Core has put C# developers and Microsoft developers back on the map, okay? We are, we're no longer just relegated to that sector of Microsoft people over there that we don't really like to deal with. Now, like, Microsoft developers are legitimate software development, open source development, cross-platform development, and it's really because of .NET Core. Like, it just opened up the doors for all of us Microsoft fans to be able to do deployments and development wherever we want. Okay, Spring is the platform for Java, which is akin to, if you were to do a comparison, it's basically like, it's similar to .NET Core, or even more specifically, like you can get MVC for Spring, so you can do like Spring MVC, which would be similar to ASP.NET Core MVC. Okay, so there's a lot of similarities between .NET Core and Spring. Spring is just the Java version of the back-end platform or library that you can use to do your web development in. All right, so the other one, you got Xamarin, which is interesting. Xamarin is kind of really cool. Again, C#. .NET developers can do cross-platform for mobile development. So we can build, using C#, we can build mobile applications, which is pretty cool. Node.js and AngularJS continue to be, no, that's not, AngularJS is not Angular, by the way. Maybe they're grouping them together. Angular, if you're looking at Angular and you're trying to figure out which Angular language to learn, go with either Angular 2 or Angular 4. Do not go to AngularJS. AngularJS is like version 1, so it's like Angular 1, and it is very different from 2 and 4, okay? Very different. All right, so let's move on to databases. MySQL is the #1 SQL database out there, and obviously, I think the obvious reason why is because it's free and it's cross-platform. So you can do MySQL deployments anywhere, and it's just, I like MySQL. I think it's a great platform. I do a lot of MySQL development because the fact that it's free, the fact that I can use it anywhere, and I can even train other people on different platforms using MySQL makes it really kind of my core. I'm going to switch over to the Professional Developers tab here, though, because I just want to make sure you guys see. All respondents, by the way, is including everybody, including students. So the Professional Developers tab here is people who are actually in the industry doing the development. So I just want to make sure I'm giving you the right statistics here. MySQL, love it. Great language. You can do pretty much everything in MySQL that you can do in all of the other SQL databases. The SQL Server, which is Microsoft SQL Server essentially, is #2 on here, right behind MySQL, and for good reason. I think a lot more enterprises are using it. SQL Server is everywhere, which is great. And I believe that they also have a Linux distribution now of SQL Server. So that's really cool. We can have SQL Server on Linux or Windows. We're no longer tied to just our platform. But if you're going to learn a database, MySQL is a great place to start. PostgreSQL is a pretty well-known, pretty well-established SQL database now. It's really gaining a lot of traction because it has it can do both document database storage and relational database management, which is really, really cool. It's kind of this hybrid SQL. If you like NoSQL more, if you want to do NoSQL type of database persistence, then you can use PostgreSQL that way. But you can also use PostgreSQL as a regular relational database management system, which makes it a great hybrid. Okay, so it makes a lot of people really comfortable. Moving on to MongoDB. MongoDB is the first one on here that is a legitimate NoSQL database. Like it's what we call a document DB, where you basically store things in what are essentially JSON objects. Which, for those of you who don't know what JSON objects are, they're basically a set of text that look like JavaScript objects. That's why it's called JavaScript object notation. But what you can do, what's really cool with JavaScript objects, is that you can put objects inside of objects. Okay, so you can have an object inside of an object, and you can keep doing this as far down the ladder as you want. You can do 3 or 4 different levels down of objects inside of objects. But what that means is that your entities are not being stored separately like they are in a relational database management system, right? With relational databases, we have to have the primary key and the foreign key, and that's how you tell which entities relate to others from table to table. But in document databases, you really just have like a single document of text, and inside of that text, all the related objects are embedded in that original object, in the base object, which is really, really convenient, because then you don't have to write any sort of special queries to just go get the data you want. You just do dot notation through the properties of your objects to go get to that particular object on your document, which is really, really cool. That's why a lot of people like MongoDB so much, is because, especially if you're doing, and this goes back to the whole JavaScript thing, right? Because if you're doing JavaScript, you know JavaScript object notation, why not have a database that is essentially JavaScript object notation? So if I'm a JavaScript developer, I have JavaScript as my primary language. I can write Node.js for my back-end development, and I can communicate and store my persistence layer in MongoDB, which is essentially just a bunch of JSON objects. I don't need to learn anything more than that. I can do all of my development just knowing JavaScript, which is why these technologies are so popular. Okay, SQLite is, I don't like it. I really hate SQLite. The main reason why it's probably even on this list is because it's a database system that gets used for Android. It's a database type, relational database type that is easy to put on Android, because you can do like file systems and stuff with it. It's more like just a file that you access as a database. You can do SQL queries to a file essentially, which makes it very convenient on Android. Okay, then you got a bunch of cloud services. I don't really want to talk too much about that, although it is interesting that Microsoft is above both Google and Amazon. That's interesting. Oracle, I hate Oracle. I'm not a fan of Oracle. Okay, now we're just going to wrap it up here. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about, which is the platform that most developers develop in. You've got Linux, you've got Windows, you've got Android, and you've got Amazon Web Services. So Linux is the #1 right now, which makes a lot of sense because it's free, right? It's a free operating system that you can deploy to servers, you can use on your desktop, and a lot of web development hosting is going to be Linux-based. That's why we saw Bash as one of those top languages that you need to learn when you're doing development. So Linux is the #1 platform that a lot of developers like to use, and that's for good reason. Windows desktops and servers is obviously #2 on here, and a lot of us Microsoft developers obviously love Windows. I love the operating system, and if you feel like you're trying to figure out where you should go, which platform you feel most comfortable with, I would say Windows is probably the easiest one to work with, but Linux is the one that you should be trying to gear yourself towards. Okay, Mac OS is down here, which is at 18% almost, 17.9%, which is pretty impressive considering I don't think they have that kind of share of the PCs in general. But that's pretty cool. Anyway, so that's pretty much it. That's all I really wanted to talk to you guys about. There's lots of more great information in here. I'm just going to do a quick little recap here and give you my recommendations, my specific recommendations here. So if you are a beginner, so here's basically, if you are a beginner or if you're an intermediate, here's my advice on those two fronts. If you are a beginner trying to learn a programming language, this may be a biased opinion, but I think C# is the best language for you to go learn. Because, again, once you learn it, it becomes very easy to go do any of those other languages, including JavaScript, okay? There's a lot of concepts that are in JavaScript that are very relatable to C#, okay? If you are not interested in doing C# and you want some other language and you're just a beginner, JavaScript is a good language to go with, and that's going to get you a career pretty much immediately. JavaScript, HTML, CSS are the three languages you really need to know, and you can get a front-end developer job pretty easily just knowing those languages. Okay? If you are already a developer, you already have a career, and let's say you already know C# or you already know Java, the next language I would highly recommend, and again, I'm going to also assume you know JavaScript at that point too, but that would be Python. If you're looking for a language to target to further your career, learn Python. It is the bleeding edge of the industry right now. So I would definitely encourage you, if you're looking for a language to further your career, Python is it. Moving on to the frameworks. If you don't know Node, learn it. You need to learn Node, especially with Express, okay? So there's a stack out there called the mean stack or the MERN stack, depending upon whether you know Angular or React. But it's basically Node, Express, Angular, and MongoDB. So if you learn the mean stack, you will be really well off. You're going to be able to build full-fledged applications, and the core component to that is knowing Node, especially with Express, okay? Then we have Angular and React. I would say so Node, I would say, is the back-end language you should learn. I am also very fond of .NET Core, so don't get me wrong. I love .NET Core. But if you're going to learn a back-end platform, learn Node, okay? Between Angular and React, my recommendation would be to learn React because there's a lot more work for it. It's a little bit of a steeper learning curve at the beginning, but once you get there, things are just going to be very nice and flow well for you. There's a lot of great community around React. Especially, the one thing that's probably the hardest to comprehend is Redux. I think Redux is the hardest thing to really understand. But databases. If you haven't already learned a database, MySQL is perfect, okay? MySQL is a very easy system to work with. It's cross-platform. You can install it on anything. It does everything. You can do all the database management system stuff that you would need to learn in any other of the relational database management systems. If you're looking for a NoSQL solution to go learn, MongoDB is the obvious choice. It's the most widely used NoSQL database out there. And if you're a JavaScript developer or you're looking at JavaScript as your development the development language that you'd like to learn with Node, then MongoDB is definitely the database, the NoSQL database you need to learn. So those would be my two, either MySQL or MongoDB or both, right? Learn them both. And then once you know those two things, you could also move on to PostgreSQL. You could do that, of course. All right, so those are my recommendations for what you should be learning in 2018. We've gone over the whole list and talked about everything, given you my opinion about these things. If you think I'm just totally dead wrong, Steve, you're a moron, and here's all the evidence to support that fact. please feel free to drop me those comments in the comment section below this video, and I will be happy to respond with a big old, thumbs up. Yeah, I'm going to give you a finger. It's going to be hopefully the thumbs up. I don't know. I'm just kidding with you guys. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please, if you did, hit me with that thumbs up button so that I know you liked it, and don't forget to favorite and subscribe to the channel. So hopefully you guys had a wonderful time watching me talk about this stuff, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.